I'm Shen Jianguang, the Chief Economist of JD Digits, and welcome to an online course series brought to you by Fudan Financial Review and the CGTN Think Tank. In the last part of this three-course series, we take a look at how, after 2 months of uncertainties, the pandemic has influenced the economy, especially business part. What concrete action and creative strategy can do right now to strengthen business? So I will start my right now. It's the managing business during the pandemic. So I have three sections. First is the situation in China and the world economy under the shock of pandemic. Second is the pressure for managing business during and after the pandemic. Third is digital transformation of the economy against the pandemic and how to forge a future growth strategy. So the first part, we all know that the pandemic is still ongoing, especially in the US and in Europe. And in some part of Asia, especially China and Korea, the pandemic seems to be under control already. But it's a globalized world. As long as some part of the economies are still suffering from the pandemic, no one can have a normal life. So the global economy has been heavily impacted, and no economy can escape from this impact. And also, how to judge the impact of pandemic and the development afterwards. I can see that the IMF actually gave a pretty positive or optimistic outlook for the pandemic. After initial sharp decline in economic activities in China and the other part of the world, the GDP actually will recover sharply in next year, 2021. So this is a prediction made by the IMF. So we have to look through the pandemic and actually how to manage the impact right now in order for a future recovery. But of course, I have to say this is a rather optimistic forecast by the IMF. There is even more pessimistic views on how things will develop. And of course, the reason for the sharp recovery and the reason to avoid a deep depression is the government action. And the US government has already initiated a $2 trillion stimulus package, $2 trillion US, that's around 10% of GDP. And Germany, for example, also released a package of 750 billion euro. That's also very sizable, like around 5% of German GDP. And some other economies as well, like in Asia, like Japan and South Korea, all announced very radical package to stave off the impact of the pandemic. This is from fiscal side. Of course, from monetary side, there are equally radical actions has been taken. For example, we know that the US Fed has already announced unlimited QE measures to smooth the impact on the financial sectors. And the Chinese government also announced a cut in interest rates and a cut in RRR, required reserve ratio. And now we actually can have a look at what has happened to the Chinese economy. So in the first quarter of this year, the Chinese economy declined by 6.8%. That's a historical low. And actually the first growth since 92. It's not there's a negative growth rate before 92. It's just that the time series, a quarterly time series of GDP started from 92. So as far as I can tell, this sharp decline actually is a historical record. So we also can see from this chart, the sharpest impact is on the industry, the secondary industry. which is manufacturing sectors. We can see it's declined by around 10%. It's a very sharp decline in economic activity in China, and so this is the negative impact we can see to the Chinese economy, and there's more details to come. And most importantly is the decline in consumption. It's the total retail sales actually declined in the first 2 months of this year by 20%. And then in March, it recovered slightly to minus 15%. But also, it's a very, very low number. Which means that the consumption actually, retail sales declined by over 15% in the first quarter of this year. This is unprecedented because in the past we can see the Chinese retail sales had been growing at around 10 to 15% a year on average, but now from around positive growth of 10 to 15% to minus 15%. Of course, this is a very sharp shock to the economy and a very sharp decline to not only to consumption, but also to manufacturing as well. We can see also in March, there is some slight recovery, but still negative growth, but it's pretty close to zero. But first 2 quarters of this year, it's a very, very sharp decline. And of course, we know that in the compare with last year, we can see it's a totally different story. Like last year, we can see Chinese industrial manufacturing growth is something around 5 to 10%. Now we are seeing around minus 5%. But of course, we can see that the most important the sectors that has been affected is manufacturing sector. And so this is the status quo of the Chinese economy. It's a very severe shock to the economy. So what should we do and how to manage business during this kind of severe shock? For Chinese economy, the first big shock we know is a supply shock. It's happened in the first 2 months or even the first quarter of this year is the closure, the shutdown of some cities and shutdown of many factories. So we can see electricity consumption across the board, except in the agricultural sector. And in the secondary industry, the manufacturing sector, it's a decline around 10%. But the tertiary sector, the service sector, has been affected even more by around 20%, the decline in electricity consumption. So this closure of the many companies in the shops have a severe impact on the economy. But that's due to the Chinese government's radical measures to fight the pandemic. It seemed to be successful as we see the pandemic seemed to be under control already in China. But then there is a second wave of shock. It's the demand shock. It's the external demand shock. That's the decline of exports. Because even that's why I say it's a globalized economy, globalized world. Even when the Chinese government can contain the pandemic, but it's the pandemic has been spreading around the world, and the demand from other parts of the world has been declining. That's why we are seeing a lot of cancellation of export orders, and also export has been declining. I think that will also have a quite negative consequences for the Chinese economy, not only in the first quarter, but we are also seeing this will continue in the second quarter as well. So this is second wave of shock. Then the third wave of shock is the talk of change the current model of concentration of supply chain in one country, which is China. So there is talks about relocation of some of the manufacturing sectors, this supply chain away from China, even after the pandemic. So especially like this medical sector, these medicines, for example, the manufacturing, medical suppliers, and also some part of other economy. That will actually, I see, has not yet happened, but it's the third wave after the pandemic. So we are seeing this kind of the three-stage impact on the economy. So under this kind of circumstances, this of course will have a severe consequences for small medium-sized companies. We did a research and a study of 10,000 of Chinese listed companies. Actually, over 2,000 companies in the main board, which means these are medium to large size companies. 3 months, this shutdown of operations, 3 months of business without any income, to see how those companies can manage their, for example, the debt payment, how they are going to pay their fixed cost. We can see that to these over 2,000 large companies, they can actually handle the situation pretty well. At least 6 months of operation without any income, they can still manage their bills. But for the 8,000 small medium-sized companies, these are even 3 months. This stoppage of operation will have a severe consequences for them. We look, for example, how they can manage their interest payment to cover their debt. If there is no income of 3 months, we see 41% of companies, they actually will have a problem already in the first month of this period. And the data, of course, their financial statement is from 2018, but we are seeing actually the worsening trend in 2019. And of course, the beginning of this year will be even more difficult for those small, medium-sized companies. That's why the government efforts to save the economy is actually concentrated in small, medium-sized companies, as well as low-income households in China. And this is some more details. Actually, the hotel, catering, and entertainment sectors will see the worst impact. So this actually, it looks like it's very important for government to start this rescue operations, to have some stimulus in fiscal and monetary sectors to help the small, medium-sized companies. So what business should do? And actually, we see the digital transformation against the pandemic is the one way to deal with the situation. Because we see actually during the pandemic period, there is a huge demand for online service, like e-commerce, this service via internet, this cloud computing, blockchain, and we know that like today there's online internet interview conferences. This actually stimulated those sectors tremendously. So, for example, our companies is involved in this kind of technology like big data, 5G, AI, blockchain. So, for example, using big data and AI, we can utilize to improve the efforts of disease prevention and controlling. We can also use this robots actually to deliver goods to help households, even hospitals, even in Wuhan, to deal with this kind of delivery of goods. So these are all based on the heavy investment in infrastructure in the past to facilitate this online business. So, for example, Chinese president encouraged to utilize digital technology to actually help to boost the economy. But I believe during the pandemic, it's especially important to use technology to make this moving, working smoothly. But of course, there is even more demand or investment afterwards. For example, through the pandemic, we find that consumer market has still a lot of potential to explore. For example, the fresh market. People are not going to the wet market, but they are actually ordering all kind of fresh food online. So the pandemic enabled the explosive growth of this SaaS industries, and digital operation system become the key to competition in industry. So these are all sectors that create tremendous opportunities for the business. So that, I believe, will be the huge opportunities created, the huge demand of online market, and this need for digital technology innovation, as well as investment in infrastructure. So we found from our experience, consumption, this community retailing and non-contact retailing, and smart city, the digital integration of transportation, healthcare, and government administration, online marketing as well, financial service. Right? We see this financial service is still quite enjoying quite good business during the pandemic, even though the physical shops, the branches of banks has been closed down. But those will facilitate the fintech business. They can provide the means for banks and financial organizations to operate during the pandemic. For example, online insurance business are still going very well. And also, of course, this also facilitates the demand for non-count payment system as well. So I think these are all the sure that the pandemic actually created, of course, some opportunities for this online business, this 5G, the AI, big data, despite the huge shock to the traditional economy. This is something I want to share with you as a starting statement. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for that, Professor Shen. Introducing for us in terms of how businesses can engage in a digital transformation to mitigate the economic fallout from COVID-19. So now it's time for our free discussion part, where we've got 3 guests from all around the world to debate and discuss what they just heard. In Washington, D.C., we've got Saruhan Hatipoglu, who is the CEO at global risk consultancy Berry. Prince Akinwale Ojomo, leader of the Nigerian Royal Cultural Exchange Program, joins us live from Abuja. And over in Delhi, we have Professor M.D. Nalapat, who is the vice chair of the Advanced Research Group at Manipal University. So, gentlemen, welcome to you all. And again, just a reminder, this is a free discussion part, so I won't be necessarily moderating the questions. Feel free to jump in whenever, wherever you want. Saruhan, how about let's start with you. Give us some thoughts in terms of what you heard from Professor Shen, especially in terms of whether or not small businesses around the world can actually afford these digital transformations that Professor Shen was talking about to help maybe tamper down the effect from COVID-19.
Yes, absolutely. First of all, thank you for that poignant presentation. We've heard a lot of good information that is coming out based on the pandemic that we're facing. It is not only specifically one area, but it is all around the world. Now, one thing I wanted to thank the professor early on is the IMF forecast that he mentioned. Being from Washington, D.C., I can say that IMF, whenever it makes the global forecast, it always paints a positive picture. And 3 to 6 months afterwards, they downgrade it. And I think they will do the same thing this time, because the V-shaped recovery or a U-shaped recovery but a short view is something that the IMF is hoping the global economies are going to accomplish. But as we heard from the presentation, there's a lot of structural changes that are taking place because of the pandemic. Now, you asked a good question about small businesses, so I will talk to you about that from Barry's point of view, because a lot of our clients are actually small clients who are trying to get through this process. One of the most important things that needs to be done is to assure that the small firms are still competitive. And we've heard from the professor, and I can vouch for that. There's a lot of work that is being conducted all around the world by the government. They're providing a lot of financial assistance for these companies to survive. I can give you an example for the United States. There's a program called Paycheck Protection Program. For small companies, the US government is saying, whoever you have as your employees, we're going to pay you 2.5 times for their salaries. And we're going to forgive this loan if you prove to us next year whether you actually spend this money on your employees. So this is a good starting point. But more needs to be done, and I'm going to take a break after I make this quick point. I just want to say that the changes, the structural changes that are taking place will need to be also absorbed by small companies. Some of these changes the professor successfully mentioned in his presentation. One of the most important things is moving to the digital platform. Countries that have more apps to do this are going to recover faster. Just a bit of a data here, a quarter of retail sales in China are in e-commerce sales or online sales. In the United States, that ratio is under 10%. We are going to see around the world more shift towards this type of platform, and the small and medium-sized companies that are able to incorporate those changes and move on to the digital platform are the ones that are going to survive. Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for that, Saruhan. Prince Ojoma, how about we get you into the conversation in terms of your thoughts on Professor Shen's presentation, in terms of perhaps the perspective from Nigeria, in terms of how small businesses are able to use digital transformation as a strategy to cope with COVID-19.
Thank you very much. And of course, thank the professor for the brilliant piece. I think from the standpoint of the Nigerian economy, of course, the small, medium enterprises have been facing a lot of challenges from the standpoint of financing and even building capacity. But at the same time, I think this pandemic, as it were right now, I think that's one of the most used words on the planet right now, is going to create opportunity for the small businesses. As it were, the Central Bank of Nigeria have been able to put in some stimulus packages to support the small businesses in terms of go under. So as it were, I think building the digital transformation platform is a good opportunity because a growing number of consumers are now going online. So it's a great and very, very strategic on the point opportunity as well, in terms of building the capacity to be able to embrace this, and at the same time to be able to build the platform, the digital platform that is needed to be able to create new numbers of people. Especially about the population in Nigeria and even in African countries, more young people are going to be, in the population. So it's a great opportunity whereby, for instance, in the past couple of weeks where there has been lockdown, a lot of activities has been in the digital platform, whereby people are making transactions without even, because there's a lockdown, even though there's still some transactions. So building infrastructure in this area will be able to really have a astronomical effect on the volume of business that will be transacted. And I'm building these infrastructures, small businesses create new innovations for them. So even at the university that we have a partnership with, we have to really create new knowledge for the students to be able to really create opportunities, so that way when they are leaving schools and they are really thinking as entrepreneurs, they're able to really create value in the real sense of it. So global opportunities that of the online, as it were, will be able to really have. Then the capacity as well is great because of the challenge of the challenges of the infrastructure, which I think the government will now know that it's a good plus for them to be able to really increase this. So having the capacity in terms of the number of young people that will be able to use this platform and interface with China, with the United States, and other countries will be a magnificent opportunity for Nigeria, as it were. Thank you.
Yeah, so using e-commerce not only to sell more domestically, but also to sell increasingly around the world. Professor Nalapad, join the conversation as well in terms of your thoughts on Professor Chin's presentation, and also, of course, India on a national lockdown from COVID-19. This is the largest in the world. How are Indian businesses coping? How are India's small business coping? Are you seeing them also going increasingly online?
Well, I'd like to say that India is a country where of 60% of the population is 30 or lower. So it's a very young population. That could be an asset. It is also a big challenge because you have to train them, you have to give them jobs. Now, one opportunity that we are seeing is that the world is now looking at diversifying its logistical chains and its manufacturing chains. And with a little bit of improvement, the belief is that India can offer an attractive platform for a large number of these manufacturing chains. I'm not saying the entire manufacturing chain, but a significant part of it, if it is cited in India. One reason is that salaries in India are very competitive. For example, with salaries in China over the last 10 or 15 years. I mean, China's salaries today are not what they were in the 1980s or even in the 1990s. And, I think that's a great thing for Chinese economy and the Chinese people. But it offers India an opportunity. Now, the Americans have, in a sense, from transitioning from a manufacturing to a service and knowledge economy, they're understanding that politically it may not be feasible to abandon manufacturing. They're going back to manufacturing, whereas what has been going on in China is very definitely moving into the knowledge industry in a very steady way. Whether it is the digitalization of currency, whether it is the relying on blockchain, whether it is a lot of emphasis on artificial intelligence, the Chinese are moving up the value chain into the knowledge. Going to be.
All right, so it seems like we are having some audio issues with Professor Nalapad. Professor Shen, would you like to respond to any of the points that our guests from around the world have made?
Yes, I fully agree. I think one actually speaker said very, very, I think nicely that the e-commerce in China accounted for around over 20% of retail sales. And there is a widespread use of mobile payment system in China. So actually, a lot of small businesses has been conducting, online after the pandemic. For example, a lot of restaurants offering this takeaway, shops are offering this online services, and the e-commerce giant like JD, we are operating without any interruption. I still can promise to deliver the goods within 12 hours. But just look at the situation globally, things are not that rosy. Right? We see a lot of other part of the world, even e-commerce giant, they have to limit the sales of goods due to the capacity. And the delivery of goods has been postponed to 5 days or even 1 week. So this actually reminds me that actually after pandemic, there will be huge investment need globally on e-commerce infrastructures, like in the transportation system. Right? China built the high-speed train network, right? Built a massive highway network. So this ensures the smooth delivery of goods and the wide use of mobile payment. So, and also the government heavy investment in mobile networks. So all this infrastructure investment need, I think, also will be urgently needed in the other part of the world as well. So I think that this is probably can create opportunity for economic recovery after this pandemic. Of course, I also agree that I used to be an IMF economist, so there may be too optimistic, as I said, regarding the recovery of the economy after pandemic. But I think because there is so much uncertainties regarding this pandemic and when it can be over, so of course they are taking a more optimistic view. But I believe things will be rather uncertain. But governments need to be ready to stand to help the small, medium-sized companies whenever necessary.
Sarahan, what do you think? I mean, the state of U.S. infrastructure is not ideal. What do you think about Professor Shen's comments in terms of really investing in infrastructure in the future to make sure businesses can better cope with this? Are you hearing anything from the U.S. government in terms of infrastructure investment down the road?
Absolutely. Investment is a must. Fiscal response is a must. We've seen the fiscal side of it come a little later in the United States, but given the partisanship that we're seeing in the political arena in the United States, the speed with which it has happened was still remarkable. But more needs to be done. The parties understand that here. But I have to say this, as part of a global response to this, the only thing that's global about this pandemic is the fact that it's global. Responses have been local. A lot of different countries have approached in different ways to help themselves, rightly so. But there has not been coordination in getting through this. Now, I want to rewind and go back to the financial crisis of 2008. And just remember how the monetary leaders and fiscal leaders back then have responded to that crisis and helped us go through that as fast as possible. And I'm not seeing it here with COVID-19. And I'll tell you this is a far more serious crisis than we've seen in 2008. We do need a global response, and that response needs to start from the fiscal side of things. Christine Lagarde of ECB said this. Almost every central banker is telling us this, that they have done all they could through the financial crisis. There needs to be a fiscal response to this. And it is wonderful what the Federal Reserve is doing here. I can tell you, they have opened a lot of liquidity windows. They're buying everything. They're buying bonds. They're buying bonds they call fallen angels now, a diplomatic way of saying junk bonds. It feels like the only thing that they're not buying is the car in my driveway. And I'm pretty sure at least, it might happen too at some point. But Federal Reserve and monetary policy's response to this is limited because this is not about something that you can solve with playing with interest rates or opening liquidity windows. You can help liquidity, which they have done, but you cannot solve the problem. So yes, I completely agree that we need a fiscal response, and we need that fiscal response in form of a large infrastructure plan, some of which, in terms of movements, we're seeing in the United States, but not as fast as I would hope it to be.
Prince Ojoma, would you like to touch upon, in terms of infrastructure in Nigeria, perhaps, where the government might need to go from there?
Which is oil, actually is it's not giving a good story. So right now, I think on the government side, they have to be aggressive, like double the aggression in terms of creating infrastructure to be able to create and tap into these opportunities that actually is going to be online. So I think from the standpoint of creating those infrastructure continuously, just a few days ago, the President Buhari has been able to set up a committee of sustainability and recovery. So that at least I think one of the key mention was the Minister of Digital Economy, I guess, because we have a minister for that. So I think they will be very aggressive in creating a platform and the infrastructure to be able to meet this. That's a great opportunity in Nigeria, I must tell you, because of course the consumption right now, because of the pandemic, is low because of nothing is happening anywhere. But I think we actually restart of the economy, there's going to be a better time for Nigeria, even in all of Africa as well.
Professor Sun, I want to come back to you real quick because digital transformation, I feel, is definitely easier for retailers who want to sell physical goods, but we do see a slower recovery for the service sector. So is digital transformation also perhaps a panacea for the service sector, which, as you mentioned, we're seeing electricity consumption falling off a little bit more, and we are seeing recovery in that sector slower?
Yes, but actually, if you look at the GDP growth in first quarter in China, actually, service sector is actually doing better than the manufacturing sector. I think the reason is certain service sectors are has not been affected much by the shutdown of the city or the businesses. For example, especially the financial services, it's actually performing the best regarding the whole economy. That's the reason I think behind why service sector is overall performing better than manufacturing. For example, the loans are given by the banks has not been affected by the pandemic because there's infrastructure in place. Even there is the Chinese central bank allow for the experiment of the offsite opening accounts, right? A distant account opening. So the banks are still can conduct their normal business by online, lending, and as well as the stock markets. People are still can buying stocks, online. Actually, you're using mobile phones. Actually, this is the reason why services are performing better. I think that this online business is one reason. But of course, one sector has been affected most is the catering service and the traveling services. Transportation, right? So this is using people have to go to the shops to conduct a business. Then that has been really affected. So that also shows how important is to have some alternatives like online business as a standby. So shops can actually doing delivery, and even restaurants can offer this takeaway services. And this is the reason why the Chinese government already announced this sort of new type of investment has been very much emphasized, called the new infrastructure, is actually, to me, is a digital infrastructure investment after this pandemic to strengthen further this digitalization of the economy.
Yeah, and for those who don't know what new infrastructure is, I mean, it's not a new concept. China has been investing in innovation for many, many years now, obviously on a very consistent basis. New infrastructure referring to AI, 5G, data centers, ultra high voltage as well. So that's what China means by new infrastructure. Professor Nalapat, in terms of India, what kind of signals are you getting from Delhi in terms of how they're supporting small businesses, perhaps through this very, very difficult time specifically? Are they talking about digital transformations for SMEs as well?
Yeah. In the case of India, we have a lot of regulatory issues which make investing in India dramatic. The advantage that we have is skilled labor, and that's a big advantage. The second advantage is location, that we are close to and at one jump to Europe as well, and to Africa, very, very important continent, especially in the future. But the disadvantage is the whole web of regulation, and this is the problem. So we are hoping that this particular crisis will be a situation in which to tackle the crisis, the government goes on with a lot of regulatory changes to make business much easier in India.
Professor Shen, in terms of how technology can make small businesses or businesses in general more agile, I think that's really what we're seeing right now for the businesses that are really surviving and perhaps thriving through COVID-19, is that when you make this digital transformation, you can indeed have more agile decision making. You can have faster decision making when it comes to implementing those decisions as well, huh?
That's right. That's right. It's actually the whole essential, meaning is to improve the efficiency and also, enhance the business without some physical contact. So this, I think, it's a very important trend. So we are seeing like a payment system. There is, no contact payment system, right? So you can do also like a meeting, conferences, been increasingly been online. So they also create the opportunity for this service to the companies, which will be engaging in this kind of online business as well. That's why I say, the development of software to catering for this kind of need. In any case, this actually improves the efficiency of the economy and actually cut the waste.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it just seems like there's different recovery speeds for different industries and sectors. I mean, it seems like we can use digital perhaps to be a little bit more precise and more targeted when we come to helping businesses. Arhan, what do you think?
Absolutely true. Look, whatever happened here in this crisis, I think it's fair to say that it's failed to change basic human needs and desires. We still want to eat outside. We still want to go to happy hour. We still want to talk to each other. So those basic consumer demand has not shifted. It's still there. The problem is the mode of delivery now needs to shift to kind of respond to the crisis that we're facing. And the companies that are able to do that are the companies, like I mentioned earlier, going to be able to capitalize on it. Forget about surviving the crisis, but capitalize on it. I'm seeing a lot of examples, I'm sure in China and all around the world, you are as well, that even teaching has moved online. You can show students that you're teaching different ways of doing the same things that you would in person. We're going to be seeing this in hospitality industry. We're going to see this in restaurants. We're going to see it in any kind of industry that you think was hit by the crisis. It's really important, and I want to underline this, to remember that the have not changed. So it is understandable to have short-term worries about what's happening, but mid to long term, this crisis, and I kind of feel uncomfortable saying that, but this crisis is going to cause a lot of innovation and changes that will lead to some companies going bankrupt and not being in business anymore. But the sooner companies can adjust to the new normal, the better they're going to be coming out of from this crisis.
All right. Thanks for that, Sarhan. I want to also bring in now our online audience who's, of course, listening to our discussion as we speak. And we have one user asking us, he's asking, or he or she is asking, I'm doing high-end ceramic tile business between China and Italy. And during this epidemic, Italy, of course, now at the epicenter as well of the COVID-19 crisis, Italy has essentially stopped working, and the Chinese consumer market has also shrunk in terms of demand. And this person is asking, should I consider marketing to the middle income group or keep my business high end? Does anybody want to jump in and answer that? Professor Shen, how about we start with you? How about you take a crack at that question?
Yeah, I think this pandemic, this disease, will affect low income people more than the high income people. Yeah, I think a lot of restaurant workers, many shops have been closed down, so the workers has been affected. But in high value added services like financial services, I think has been affected least. So these have a high paying job. So by comparison, I think definitely this kind of demand are still there. I think one example I can give you that the reopening of a shopping mall in Guangzhou, the first day, I think they are selling the Hermes goods, the Hermes shop. They are selling like they are one day revenue is 27 million renminbi. This is a record because as I think the professor said, people still have the need to buy stuff. physically. So when they first opened the mall after like several weeks of shutdown, actually people rushed to buy. The luxury goods actually just selling pretty well. So I think so. Of course, for the business people, I think there is no need to change their the styles. Some demand still there, but of course it will have to go through a period of difficulties, and of course the more.
Professor Shen, do you think technology can also help this user in terms of our netizen right now, in terms of differentiating between which group he or she should focus on? Right now, it seems like this person is selling towards more high-end consumers, but can this person perhaps use digital technology to transform the business to better identify which group to sell to? Either it's the middle income group or a more high-end consumer group. Can we use big data or AI in order to identify that better consumer group to sell to?
Well, definitely. We are using the data, for example, to analyze which sectors, which groups, the data-driven businesses are actually is a very prosperous business in China. This, of course, you have to do some studies, and but of course, this is becoming quite successful business sectors to using the big data to analyze, to target the clients and actually to enhance the sales.
Saruhan, Professor Nalapat, Prince Ojomo, do any of you want to jump in terms of what you want to say to our netizen who's listening to us right now with that question?
Well, I just want to say that India, in agriculture, for example, many small farmers are now turning to their smartphones, and hundreds of millions of people are now access to the internet through the smartphone to get information on prices, to get information on fertilizers, other inputs, and on markets. So I think you're perfectly right. Technology is changing the life, including of people who are not even middle income, but low income.
I agree with that. The middle income population and middle income group actually in the globe is the most to grow in the next 5 to 10 years, and even maybe more looking at the horizon. But the important thing here is any small, medium-sized business will tell you that it really depends on your bottom cost structure. So the marginal cost of producing that one luxury good to that luxury end customer, how much cost that's causing the person who posed this question. Now, without knowing the cost structure, it is difficult to say this, but for the short term. But the long-term trends are shifting towards middle-income businesses. So if any business whose target is high-end takes this time, start organizing, getting the innovations done, using the digital platform more, reducing their costs, might actually be a good idea to kind of get that middle income group into their customer horizon. If they can do that in the next 5 years or so, I think the person who posed the question will really appreciate the business gain.
We have another netizen who's asking us how small businesses, specifically outside of China, can better cope with this. I guess where this person is coming from is they do see businesses here in China using online platforms more. So specifically for businesses outside of China, small businesses, how can they better cope? Prince Ojomo, what's the perspective from Africa?
Yes, I think from the standpoint of for us in Nigeria, in Africa, the opportunity will still expand because of the growing population, so to speak. I think to mention about the issue of the use of the infrastructure and digital economies, there's going to be an amazing and continuous improvement in this infrastructure. So which will create opportunity for the people using it, and even international trade in the areas of e-commerce. So for those who actually will be able to really use the digital technology to be able to really sell across the world, that will even increase the opportunity as well. So I think another important point I need to mention, I know my other colleagues, learning and e-learning and stuff like that, I think that's a good opportunity as well, because this shutdown has been able to create learning in a new way for people. And at the same time, I think a mention of a backward integration will be important especially to be able to really do backward integration, for instance, in Nigeria, whereby a lot of agro processing based on, of course, the new level of the revenue for the government. So I think from that standpoint, the government will be very proactive to do backward integration in agro processing and agriculture as well. So that way, and create new opportunity in digital platform, because that's how the new and the young people can be engaged, because this is very important. Creating jobs for those who may have lost their job based on the revenue loss in the economy. Then they need to create new level of jobs for people, and that's going to be new skills as well for people whose sector actually must have gone into oblivion or may not be able to really get out of this bankruptcy.
Okay, and Professor Shin, I'm going to ask you one final question before we wrap up. That's in terms of how we can better use technology right now to identify and spot consumer trends. Because right now, of course, business want to better match supply with demand, and perhaps technology can better help us do that by identifying new consumer trends.
Yeah. I think for new consumer trend, it's in China after this the pandemic, we are seeing people are spending more on, for example, actually we can find some interesting trend change. People actually cooking at home, so they are buying a lot of kitchenwares, the fresh foods instead of eating in the restaurants. This of course I hope it's hopefully it's temporary. After this after the shutdown, people will enjoy the normal business as well. But right now we are seeing this changing consumer trend is people cook at home, so they are buying a lot of this kind of stuff. Of course, we are seeing the purchase of normal goods. Actually, the reduction in the luxury goods at this period of time. Of course, people are saying there's no need to do makeup because a lot of people are staying home, so there's no need to buy luxury goods and luxury clothes. So we are seeing during this kind of period. But I expect that things will return to normal after some several quarters. We will see using big data. Actually, we can see a quite clear trend how things can change.
Hold on, Professor Shin. I mean, at JD.com, you're also using big data to serve as a platform, right? Connecting businesses in need in terms of labor shortages, material shortages with government officials as well to better help these companies in trouble, because you have the real-time data and needs of these companies trying to survive throughout the crisis.
This is regarding, that's right, mainly regarding our, for example, the fintech business. Right, so we do this lending. We know the difficulties, so we are helping them to meet their financial needs better than the other financial institutions, because we know their real situation, and so that's how we can help regarding in terms of fintech business. So there is no need to make a loan decision by loan officers. Everything done by AI. Everything done by the big data. AI driven, the big data driven. So it's a very, very highly efficient system and with a very low cost. So that's how we can help small, medium-sized companies.
Okay. All right. Great stuff. We are going to leave it there, gentlemen. Many thanks to Professor Shin Jianguang, who is a guest professor at the Fanhai International School of Finance at Fudan University, as well as to our guests around the world, Prince Akinwale Ojomo in Abuja. We have Professor Nalapad from Delhi, and of course, Saruhan Hatipoglu joining us in Washington, D.C. And thank you to our online viewers, wherever you may be spending this time with us. And that was the final session of our three-part series from CGTN Think Tank in terms of how to minimize the economic impact of COVID-19. Just a reminder, in our first session, we spoke about the economic recovery post-COVID-19. The second session was about using financial technology to mitigate the impact of COVID-19. Today, we talked about how businesses can perhaps better manage and cope through the crisis by digitally transforming themselves. So for a recap of all three sessions, you can find all of these sessions on our series online on CGTN, our digital platforms, as well as major social media platforms all over the world. All right, so do indeed stay tuned to CGTN Think Tank as we continue to partner with other institutions around the world to bring you more thought leadership here on China as well as around the world. I'm Michael Wong, Beijing, and we hope to see you again next time. Bye for now.
Thank you.